when I think about how are we thinking differently, how are our brains working differently? Well, if you're innovating, if you're creating, you're trying to solve a problem. An innovator, as I said, is trying to solve a problem in a unique and often creative way and helpful, right? You want it to be a helpful solution. Hello and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, I interview peak-performing world changers in the creative, social impact, and vegan spaces. If you like what you hear on this episode, you're going to want to check out the bonus mini episode that you can access if you DM me at Isolde T on Instagram and you let me know you want it. You'll get access to bonus episodes, new art, my latest writing, and other fun benefits. And now, let's get to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. Today I want to talk about something that I've been doing some thinking about, and that is, what does a creative or an innovator do differently? What do they do differently? How do they think differently? What do they do differently? What do they say differently than people who might not consider themselves to be innovators or creatives? And you know, if you've listened to this show for any length of time, I believe we all have that creative spark inside us, so this is a little bit of a funky episode because I'm talking specifically about people who are utilizing those creative or innovative muscles, if you will. Because, you know, I think we all do. I think we all come into this world with a certain amount of curiosity and a certain amount of creativity, and our brains are wired for it. Our brains are wired to ask what if and imagine if questions. Otherwise, we would never learn to speak, never learn to walk, never learn to do much of anything because we wouldn't be curious enough to try. So something in us gets us curious, something in us gets us excited, something in us gets us interested in learning and trying and creating. And, you know, the ultimate sort of definition to me of a creative is someone who is making something out of nothing in whatever format they are choosing to be creative. An innovator takes that creativity and moves it into a problem-solving mode. They're trying to come up with cool, unique, creative solutions to challenges, to problems that either they have already identified or that the world already has talked about. And so now they're trying to innovate new ways. The iPhone is a perfect example of an innovation. The cell phone itself is a perfect example of an innovation. We needed to be able to communicate in a way that was mobile. People needed to be able to go from one place to the other, but still stay in contact. So the people, I guess, at Nokia, maybe they were first, went, okay, what do we need to do? And then taking their cues from the flip communicators from Star Trek, somebody went, well, why don't we make it mobile? And of course, the big, huge mobile phones or car phones they fit in suitcases at first. And as technology kept developing all these different electronics and things like that, they say that technology doubles every 18 months, which I think is amazing. We actually ended up with something that is substantive, right? We actually ended up with something that we can use now that fits in your pocket, right? So we went from landlines only to being able to talk on the phone, even if we're in the farthest reaches of the earth, right? You can be thousands of miles away from someone and reach them immediately. And this reminds me of a story that I think is really interesting, and that is, I was in South Africa, and again, if you're a longtime listener of the show, you've heard me talk about this. I was in South Africa doing a workshop for NASA. I love being able to say that. That's actually really cool. And I was talking to a bunch of people who were from Africa, from different countries in Africa. And while I'm teaching about earth science, somebody in the room got a phone call. And they got this phone call and they took the call. And so they're talking happily away while I'm trying to teach. And I'm kind of going, well, I'm trying to teach to 80 people, but there's someone having a pretty loud conversation in the fifth row. And so I kept trying to teach because they weren't getting off the phone. And after they got off the phone, I said, hey, would you all mind please silencing your cell phones? And pretty much everybody in the room was like, oh, no, we can't do that. And I said, why? And the answer was, well, someone might call. And I went, okay. And I said, well, then if you get a phone call, would you mind walking out of the room to take it? Oh, I can't do that either. Why not? Well, because I don't want to miss something you say. And I sort of scratched my head at that, but then we moved on and I kept going. And after that particular session, one of the people who was our host came over to me and said, I think you need to understand something. These folks went from no communication to mobile communication. So they didn't extrapolate from no communication to landlines to mobile phones. They went from no communication, and they call it leapfrogging. They leapfrogged. Leapfrog, I'm not sure what the way to say it is, but it was a leapfrogging situation, and they went straight from no communication to cell phones. And so he said, before, if you needed to get information to or from a village that's 30 miles away, you had to go to that village 30 miles away. Now you can call, and to them, not only was it miraculous, but they embraced the technology, right? So they went woof, and they were on it. And that was Nokia. Finland came in the late 90s and just went nuts, and they were giving access to people who had never had access before. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you go, okay, here is access, wow, they jumped on it, right? And their methods of using this incredible and miraculous device were different than people who are, for example, living in the USA or in parts of Europe, because we had landlines first. So the different way of thinking developed because the technology was there. And so when you talk about creatives and innovators and how they think differently, sometimes they leapfrog, right? And what might seem kind of weird to you and me is perfectly normal to someone who went leapfrogging over the process that other people went through, right? We went through, you went through sort of this no phone to phone landline to modems to T1, T3 lines, et cetera, et cetera. And now we've got fast Ethernet and cell phones and all this other stuff. And it was kind of a progression. But if you leapfrog, then the way you think has to go too. It has to jump with you. And so some of the things that I would consider a little strange, like I'm going to sit in the room and I'm going to talk while I'm in a classroom learning, is perfectly normal to someone for whom the technology was just there, right? And so when I think about how are we thinking differently, how are our brains working differently? Well, if you're innovating, if you're creating, you're trying to solve a problem. An innovator, as I said, is trying to solve a problem in a unique and often creative way and helpful, right? You want it to be a helpful solution. And sometimes that means connecting dots that seem disparate, right? To me, it seemed really unusual that gentleman was going to sit and talk while he was on while I was teaching. To him, it was perfectly normal. The technology went from no tech to pretty high tech, skipping the social niceties of what a landline brought to us. And he connected the dots in this way, and he was off to the races. So how do our brains do that? How do our brains take that new information and synthesize it in order to be able to apply these solutions, right? So it's not just the creator creating, but it's how is the user using that technology? And then when you're doing it, you have to think about it in those terms. If you are innovating, if you are connecting these dots that no one else has connected before and providing technology or providing solutions, how is the user going to use what you provide? And I just recently had a wonderful interview with a man named Neil Sahota, who is the AI consultant to the United Nations, which I think is so cool. And I'm going to bring his episode to you in the next few weeks/months. But we were talking about that. We were talking about the fact that the user experience is crucial to any innovation, right? If you just innovate willy-nilly without taking the user into account, are you innovating something useful? Are you actually doing something anyone's going to want to use or incorporate into their lives? Because remember, there are lots of things that have been invented that people went, I don't want that. And they died on the vine. So when you are innovating, when you are creating, you have to give thought to, is anyone going to need this? Is anyone going to want this? And you can do some market research, right? If you are creating something that no one else has created before, find out if people are interested. Whether it's an innovation that's solving a problem or an artistic creation, are people interested? And I've talked about this before, right? I've said This artistic creation can be something that you create, and it is beautiful and amazing and wonderful and thought-provoking and compelling and enticing and engaging and miraculous. And if all you want to do is have created it, you are good to go. But if what you want to do is eventually make it as part of your business, you need to find out whether or not people are interested in what you're creating. Right? That's something that I think is so crucial. Now, I was listening to an interview with Michael R. Jackson, who is the creator of the new Broadway sensation that is up for a bunch of Tonys, A Strange Loop. And he was saying that one of the things that he wanted to do as the creator of this musical that is unlike anything you've ever seen before. I've seen it and it's outstanding. But he wanted to have something that highlighted the experience of people like him. He is a Black, gay man in musical theater, and he wanted to have something that highlighted his experience. And he said something very interesting in the interview. He said, there are some people who are going to look at the people who are in the show, because the show is about a man named Usher, who is an usher at the Broadway show The Lion King, and about his experience of trying to write a musical about a musical who's trying to write a musical about a musical, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the strange loop part. And he said that all of the other cast members who play his thoughts, Usher's thoughts in the show, he said they're all people of color and they're all queer in one way or another. And he said there are going to be people who are going to look at this and go, well, I don't see myself in that. And then there are people who are going to look at it and go, wow, I want to see myself in that. I want to see how this reflects who I am back to me. And I want to see this slice of this person's life, right? So he, at that point, said, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if what I was creating was going to work, but then he won the Pulitzer for it, right? So he won the Pulitzer for this thing. And he said, I started thinking that maybe people were going to be interested. And so he fought through various and sundry ways with his team to get this to go up on Broadway. And they had it at the Woolly Mammoth Theater in Washington, D.C. And now it's up on Broadway and it's a hit and everything is amazing for him. And may he have a long and storied career. But the point is that in that moment, until he started seeing that people were reacting favorably, he wasn't sure. And so as a creative, if you're making something from anything from an NFT to a 40-foot sculpture, whatever it is, if you're doing it for yourself, that's one thing. If you're doing it to see if you can sell it, you need to find out if people are interested. Now, this is not to say that you shouldn't create it. This is something that I want to sort of talk about right now. My friend Al Petaway, who's a Grammy Award-winning guitarist, and I were talking, and he and I were chatting about this notion of creating your music. And I said, I don't know if my music is commercial enough to sell. And he said, you should just make your music and you'll find your audience. And I thought, oh, that's awesome. That presupposes that your music is good enough. And by your, I mean mine. Is my music good enough? I don't know. It sells, which is great. But you have to be, that's the baseline nowadays. Be good. That's the baseline. But then we're such a savvy audience. You also need to look at it from the perspective of, does your audience want it? Do the people who buy your stuff want what you're doing? And I've talked about this before, Elvis Costello getting really ticked off at people because all they wanted to hear was Allison and not his new stuff. And it's because they know it and they love it, right? And so his new stuff was kind of dying on the vine, and he wanted people to be interested in the new stuff, and they really kind of weren't. And so what is it that you need to do to make your new stuff compelling enough that people want to give it a chance to? And that's the whole point of kind of doing some market research, or inviting people to listen to it or enticing them to listen to it, right? I'm not saying to sell to your friends. Give it away for free to your friends. See if they're interested in being an evangelist for you. If they like it and they want to put it up on social media or something like that, that's great. But don't charge them for it. That's not what this is, right? If you want to pay an influencer to chat about your stuff, like I'm going to do that with my book, the cover model, Miranda Roldan, who's an amazing actor, and she's a lifestyle model. She's terrific. She's also the cover model to the first book in the Cassie Belmont Tarot Reader Mysteries, which is Die by the Sword. She's going to actually, full disclosure, she's going to do it. She's actually read the book. She loves it. So I feel really good about asking her to talk about it on her social. And she's the cover model, which is awesome. But the reason I'm talking about this is that I feel fine about doing that. She's read the book. She loves it. I didn't charge her for the book, right? And I'm gonna ask her to talk about it on social because she did like it. Like if she hated it, no, of course I wouldn't ask her to talk about it. But she did like it, so I feel pretty good about going, hey, would you mind chatting about it on your socials? And having that kind of person who is an influencer talk about it is a beautiful thing because they have reach. And I want it to be, she lives down in Florida, and I want it to be something that is a beach book, right? I want it to be a great beach read. So it's perfect for me to ask her to talk about it. And you can pay an influencer and go, hey, can you do this with my product, with my creation? And I get that all the time. People invite me to book launches and other things thinking maybe I will review the book. Maybe I'll talk about whatever it is. And if I like it, I do talk about it. And if I don't, I'd rather not pan it. I just don't talk about it, right? So to be honest. And so that's something for us to think about. I know I started this whole thing about whether or not creatives think differently. We have to think about this as a business. We have to think about this as the way our brains work. And often creatives aren't looking at it from the sales perspective. They're not looking at it from necessarily an analytical perspective unless you happen to be gifted with both. But you have to think about all of this stuff if you're going to either make art or solve problems. So now I'm getting to the very point of this episode. What do you need to do to embrace that innovative, creative way of thinking? One of the best things you can do is get curious and ask yourself, what are the possibilities? What are possible solutions to this problem? How can I look at it from a different perspective, right? It's like looking at a Rubik's Cube and going, I see only one side. Well, don't just look at one side. Look at all the sides. Make lists if you need to. Draw them out, speak them out, whatever. Look at all the facets of what you are trying to achieve, whether it is to create a painting or a song or to innovate a new way of, I don't know, a new way of collecting solar energy or wind energy, right? Whatever it is you're trying to do, you need to look at it from different perspectives, right? Right now, and I'm not saying that it's possible to do solar panels from anything, but right now our base for solar panels, for example, is silicon. Okay, silicon is the base for solar panels. Is there a better way? Is there a better way? And if so, what is it? If you were going to do that, if you're an engineer who's looking at it and you want to think innovatively, look at if there are different and better solutions. Make your list, figure it out. And for me, I brainstorm by giving myself 5 minutes, and I put a timer on and I type up all the possibilities I can think of. I'm going for 30 in 5 minutes. I do this with taglines. I do this with headlines. I do this with everything. Just make it so that there are no bad answers. Just get it out on paper or on the computer. Try to get to 30 in 5 minutes and see what wacky, crazy, amazing potential solutions you have. What are the ideas that jump out? Because somewhere around 17 to 19, you're going to have gold. So that's a great way of starting it. And I think I'm going to really talk more about this whole notion of how do innovators think differently a lot more. And more importantly, I'm going to talk about how innovators can work with teams to come up with solutions more quickly, more easily, and ones that are even more effective because your strengths and their strengths can be complementary. Alrighty, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was far-reaching and far-ranging, but I think that there's some really good stuff here, and I'm going to need to go back myself and listen and see what's what. If you're interested in getting some coaching around unleashing your own innovative drive and creative abilities, please do me a favor, book a discovery call. There's a little button in the show notes or a little link in the show notes. Go ahead and book a discovery call. And if you have some ideas, I'd love to hear from you. There's also a little thing you can leave me a voicemail. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg for the Innovative Mindset Podcast, reminding you to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2022. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, remember to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.